Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we embark on day 3 of a 5-day program looking at the poison glyphosate and how it has become ubiquitous around the world, given the Roundup and other pesticides that have been brought out by Monsanto and other companies. Before we launch into the program, I want to just provide an update on world events, as I always do, and just to point out that in the last few days, culminating yesterday in the decision by Germany to send its Leopard tanks to Ukraine, following the United States saying that they would be sending the Abrams tank to Ukraine. The war in that area has now escalated very dramatically, particularly given what the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Milley, said in Germany a couple of days ago as he was discussing with the Germans the tank transfer to Ukraine, saying that with the tanks, with the Leopard tank, with the Abrams tank, the United States and NATO are now ready for offensive operations against Russia to completely force the Russians to withdraw from Crimea and the land bridge that they have established to secure access to the Black Sea. As you all know from my previous statements about this, we are now in the most dangerous moment in our lifetime. And everybody needs to take that in. Not since the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 has the world been anywhere near in the dangerous moment that it is now. Because you have the two superpowers in the world, the Americans and the Russians, squaring off. This isn't a matter of the United States attacking Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya or even Vietnam 60 years ago, where it was never a fair fight. This is a matter, everyone, that the two greatest powers on planet Earth, armed with arsenals of massive proportions, are now escalating their war. If they do not stop, we're going to see a nuclear exchange. And it'll be happening right at the moment when we should be working with the Russians and the Chinese and nations all over to deal with the real issues confronting the human race, at the heart of which is runaway climate change. And the fact that at this moment, we are heading into a nuclear exchange in Central Europe, given everything else that the world needs to be dealing with, is an act of madness that we all need to understand is happening right in front of our eyes. And the tragedy is deepened when one considers that there's virtually no opposition to the escalation of war. I've done a number of teach-ins on this. I'll continue to talk about it. We're convening a summit on Ukraine, the 27th of February to the 3rd of March, and then again in April, and then again in June as this war escalates. But I appeal to everyone to take very seriously that this conflict is now spinning out of control, just like our climate is. And unless people of goodwill demand an immediate ceasefire and a summit of all parties, we're likely to do damage to ourselves from which we may not recover. Because nuclear war is a level of permanence, the like of which humanity has never seen. I know we have to deal with other issues today, but I just want to underscore the reality of what we're heading into with Ukraine as the irresistible force of US and NATO expansion to the east is meeting the immovable object of Russian nationalism as it's secured its strategic access as a great power to the Black Sea and beyond. The danger cannot be overestimated. I know this is a tough way to start a call, but the world is in a very serious situation that we at Humanity Rising remind ourselves of as world events unfold. Let us just take a moment as we internalize our situation to just simply breathe together. In a moment, you'll hear the sound of a bell. Take a deep breath in for about 5.5 seconds. You'll hear another bell and then breathe out for 5.5 seconds. You'll breathe in 5.5 breaths a minute to take in 5.5 liters of air. It's the most effective way known to modern science and ancient mysticism to bring coherence to your body, to optimize all your body systems, to bring coherence between your heart and your brain, to stabilize your emotions, and to enhance your mental acuity. We're going to take 10 breaths together, and then we'll commence our program. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. It's so good to breathe as one. It's my pleasure now to introduce my good friend, Tom Eddington, who's the CEO and founder of Endangered.global, very successful businessman and executive coach, passionate about the environment and nonviolence and enabling humanity to rise. Tom has convened this 5-day program on glyphosate. So Tom, with many thanks, I turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Jim, and thanks for the reminder and the updates on what's happening in Ukraine and on the world stage. We'll focus on a different code red issue this morning, but that one is critical as well. And it's in some respects it's a tough time to be a human. So I'd like to welcome our guests today, and just a little bit of framing. So we started the week talking about the history of chemicals in general, and specifically glyphosate, and the impact it's had on destroying our topsoil and the natural systems, but also the impact it's had on our food systems and on our healthcare systems. Yesterday, we talked a bit about how it's corrupted our scientific community, with as many as 15 scientists leaving science for each scientist who stays, because of industry pressure to report on and do research on things that are not good for human health, not good for nature, and yet serve the interest of industry. And it's impacted academia as well. Today, we're going to explore how glyphosate, in particular Monsanto, but corporate interests, have impacted our legal system. And with that, I'd love to invite Michael Baum, senior partner of Wisner Baum. Michael's a senior partner at the national plaintiff firm, formerly known as Baum Hedlund, Aristi, and Goldman, based in Los Angeles. For 29 years, Michael was the managing partner of Baum Hedlund until he turned over the reins to Brent Wisner at the beginning of 2023. Under Michael's leadership, the firm won billions in consumer fraud and product liability cases against some of the world's largest pharmaceutical and life sciences corporations, including Bayer, formerly known or previously the entity Monsanto, Eli Lilly, Forest Labs, GlaxoSmithKline, and Pfizer, among others. It's a sophisticated legal team that helped uncover harmful drug industry practices, chemical manufacturer misconduct, and deceptive marketing schemes, which have resulted in groundbreaking verdicts, major consumer safety advocacy, and improved drug warning labels. The firm was one of the first law firms in the country to take on Roundup, glyphosate, the weed killer cancer cases against Monsanto. Michael and his colleagues served on the trial teams for the first 3 Roundup trials against Monsanto, resulting in a $2.4 billion verdict. And for the plaintiffs, those trial victories paved the way for settlement resolutions in 2020 worth a combined $10.9 billion, which is an extraordinary milestone. Also joining us today is Kelly Ryerson. Kelly works at the intersection of agriculture, nutrition, and health. She started the news site Glyphosate Facts, which exposed and explains how our chemical agriculture system has led to an explosion in chronic disease. She collaborates with scientists, doctors, farmers, and companies to better address agrochemical damage to our soil and bodies. Kelly has a BA from Dartmouth and an MBA from the Stanford Business School. And finally, we've got Bob Howard today with us. Bob was juror number 4 in the Monsanto case in 2018 in the case with Dewayne Johnson versus Monsanto. He and 11 other jurors returned a stunning, virtually unanimous $289 million verdict in favor of Mr. Johnson, a school groundskeeper in California, who blamed the Monsanto company for the cancer he contracted after spraying the herbicide Roundup. A few weeks later, Robert wrote a letter to the presiding judge protesting her tentative ruling to toss the verdict. After 4 other jurors followed suit, sparking a second wave of global media coverage of the already closely watched case, the judge reversed her tentative ruling and upheld the verdict, although she reduced the award to $78 million. As the Johnson case was appealed, Robert continued to speak out. He was invited to guest blog 2 ensuing trials for glyphosate-girl.com under the name AOJ, which stands for Agent Orange Juice. In February of 2019, truthout.org published his criticism of the federal judge overseeing thousands of Roundup cases for his handling of the first bellwether trial in federal court. In May, the Wall Street Journal published his response to their editorial that used Monsanto talking points verbatim. Bob was granted numerous interviews, including with the Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, ABC News, AB7 News in San Francisco, the San Francisco Chronicle, Courthouse News, the St. Louis Business Journal, Planet Waves, and others in speaking out against the trial. So Michael, Bob, Kelly, welcome. You want to turn your videos on and your audio on?
Hey, Tom.
Hi.
Morning.
So Michael, I'd like to start with you, and if you could just briefly share with us the journey that your firm took in bringing the suit against Monsanto and the process that you went through, the experience you had as an attorney, and what was the same in this case, similar to what we've seen with big tobacco and others, and what was unique to this case?
Well, I think it started with bees. Brent Wisner and I were thinking about the next case we wanted to do between some litigations, and we wanted to do something that might affect what's killing the pollinator population. And so we started doing research on that. And during the process of researching that, one of our staff had a relative who had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma following using Roundup on his orchard. And she asked if we would look into it because they had done some research that found that there was an association between Roundup and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And they had found that IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, had concluded it was a probable carcinogen and for humans. And I read that and did an analysis of the epidemiology, the studies that went into it, and then the animal studies, the cell studies, and said, oh, this looks like it might be a case. And I looked around on the internet for other law firms to do it because I thought that taking on Monsanto by ourselves might be a daunting task, and I was looking for allies. And one after the other, it turned out that people were just advertising about it. They weren't actually litigating the cases. And then just almost by coincidence, I was on the phone with Mike Miller, who I'd done some other cases with at the Miller Law Firm. And we were talking about the Actos case where we got a multi-billion-dollar verdict as well. And he asked, what are you up to? I said, well, I'm doing some research on this Roundup stuff. And he said, you are? Well, so are we. And we've got a meeting like in 2 weeks in Colorado, organizing the team to start this litigation. And he got all excited about it. And I said, well, okay, we'll come. So Brent and another lawyer from our firm attended that meeting, and that became the group that ran the litigation. And that was Weitz Luxembourg and Amy Wagstaff and Andrews Wagstaff and the Miller firm and us, really doing the major work that led to the wins and litigation leading up to the verdicts and then the verdicts themselves. And it was a very much of a team effort. It wasn't just Baum Hedlund. It wasn't just our team. We had a lot of really smart lawyers who dedicated themselves to working on what was a very, at the time, viewed as an unlikely case to win. And so we pretty much worked on it full time for about 2 or 3 years, getting up to the Johnson trial, and Mike Miller was supposed to be the trial attorney for that. And about 2 weeks before the trial, he had a kiteboard incident and almost died, had fractured most of the bones in his face and in his chest. And he survived, and his wife and one of his partners called up to see if we would help try the case with their second in command, Tim Litzenberg, who had also been active in litigating the case and strategizing where to file and things like that. And we said, yeah, and they said, well, and that was a Friday, about 2 weeks before the trial. And then the next Monday, we were supposed to do like a conference call with Dave Dickens, delightful Dave, and Tim Litzenberg. And during that conversation, Tim Litzenberg had some type of epileptic attack and smashed. We heard, and Dave got on the phone and said, "We'll call you back." And turned out that he had some type of epileptic event and it knocked his head, and he was incapacitated. And so Dave was left, who had not really worked on the case much, asking us to take over and become the lead counsel 2 weeks before trial. And fortunately, Brent had been rehearsing his opening statement for about a year. He'd been planning it. We worked and had prepped all the main experts, so we knew the case really well, and had been assembling the key documents and trying to get them declassified. And Brent just took on the job and did a brilliant job delivering the case on short notice. And Dave Dickens and Jeff Travers from the Miller firm did an incredible job filling in, helping with the documents, helping with the briefing. It was a major task, and it was a historic event in many ways. And I made a lot of friends like Kelly and Bob along the way, and we'll consider them lifetime friends as a result of the work that they did during the trial and after the trial.
And anything you want to share about the strategy and the approach that you took? We've seen certainly with big tobacco some of the activity that's happening with Exxon in their research in the 1970s around climate change. Other industry bad actors. Anything that helped inform your legal strategy in this case?
Well, as it turned out, my backdoor neighbor at the time was Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Bobby Kennedy, who was an environmentalist lawyer. And at the outset of getting involved with these cases, I asked him if he'd like to co-counsel with us. And he had quite a bit of experience litigating against environmental polluters, and including Monsanto. And he said that one of the things you're going to deal with is that they're going to engage in a major PR battle. They're going to poison the community with their false statements and try to influence the jury with that. And they'll use PR companies, they'll use the media, they'll use all sorts of actual spying to get their way and to continue with what they called their freedom to operate unregulated, the FTO. And so he recommended that we do everything we can early on to counter that. And so he took on doing counter blogs leading up to the trial and throughout the trial. And I decided that one of the things that we had done as a firm was declassify internal documents we got from Discovery. and make them available to reporters. And so we had a protective order at the beginning that allowed us to get the documents confidentially, but allowed us also to declassify them in the event that we felt that they were improperly labeled confidential, they were not trade secrets, and they were things that the public, regulators, and legislators around the world ought to know. So we initiated the process. Lehman McHenry and I and Pedram Asfandiari in my office assembled what we thought were the hot documents. And Jeff Travers was helped with assembling some of those documents. Brent and I and Pedram went through and found a bunch. And then we had to make this big Excel chart and send it off to Monsanto and ask them to say, these are not confidential. And as we got documents declassified, they became, Jeff and Mike and Dave attached some documents to a motion, and they ended up being made public. And that started the first drop of what became, an avalanche of declassified documents called the Monsanto Papers that exposed the dirty tricks that Monsanto had been doing, copying the tobacco industry and the oil manufacturing, the dirty tricks that have been the pattern. And among those are attacking academics who say anything negative about their product, having PR programs to link reporters or attack reporters like Carrie Gillum, who write negative things about Monsanto or Roundup, actually spying. We got documents from this Hackler group, which was some former British intelligence and Israeli intelligence that conducted corporate spying. And we got those reports and got some of those declassified. And so we continued to this drip of documents as they were trying to do their counter PR. We got these documents out, and they became a firestorm around the world. And that I think was one of the things that we had implemented to counteract what had been done in the prior litigations in the tobacco, et cetera.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. We had Carrie on the panel on Monday talking about what this has been like for her, the personal attacks that have come on against her and Claire from GM Watch. And then yesterday, the two scientists we had on were sharing the same experience of being personally attacked. And I'd love to hear that from the three of you. But Bob, I'd like to get your take on this, particularly as someone who was selected as a jurist and had no background in this trial. And so I'd love to hear a bit about what was the experience like for you as a jurist?
Wow. That's a life-altering experience. I mean, you don't know. I didn't realize till later that when to be a juror, you actually sort of give up some of your First Amendment rights so that other people can have their constitutional rights, to a trial by jury. When you're a juror, you can't talk to anybody about the trial. You can't do any research and so on and so forth. But wow, the big thing that happened to me was that, well, first of all, I couldn't believe I was picked as a juror, because once it was revealed what this case was, I said, oh, well, they're going to find out that I am a member of all these environmental organizations, at least in terms of donating money, maybe not actual. The thing I was actually participating in and doing things with would be 350.org at the time. And I went home after the first day of jury selection. We did the questionnaire. I told my wife, I said, there's a snowball's chance in hell I'll be on this jury. And I go back the next day and I'm like, the fourth person picked out of there's like 200 and whatever people there, my fellow San Franciscans. So, and then as you go through the process of jury selection, it took 3 days. They weed people out, initially from their questionnaire, and then they ask you questions directly. And I just I didn't get kicked off. And then on day 3, I just out of the blue, they said, okay, everybody stand up and take the oath. I'm like, we just looked at each other and went, wow. But like I say, it was life altering. And so I had always, been thought of myself as an environmentalist, if not like really an activist. That's I think a term that's meant for some very special people. But and like I said, I didn't think I would be on a jury because of things I did or subscribed to or gave money to. And the only time I was a real activist is when I was like 18. I got arrested at a nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania for trespassing as part of a protest. And my mom bailed me out. Bless her heart. That's what that activists are, the people that really, I think, are the people on the ground who put their body between the people and nature and whatever the problem is. But anyway, the trial kind of reactivated that part of me, of this, that I wasn't really doing anything. And I still don't feel like I'm doing anything, but it's so difficult. But that's kind of the overarching, experience for me. So when the judge, there's so many remarkable things about the trial. The case that the lawyers presented, making this very complicated science graspable for ordinary people. Although as far as my fellow jurors go, I don't think they were ordinary. I think they were an extraordinary group of citizens, very smart. Just that to get a random group of let's see, we had 4 alternates, so 16 people who are just so friendly. It's just that the odds of that happening seemed like a long shot. But I don't know. I don't want to go on too much. I don't know if that gets anywhere near what you're interested in hearing about, because there's just so much to it.
One of the things I'd like to add is that in a lot of trials like this, lawyers are advised to not have the smart, well-educated people in the trials, because they're easier to manipulate. And we had the opposite approach. We wanted the smartest people we could get, because there was a lot of science in this, a lot of biology and physics, physiology, medical science, epidemiology, statistics. It had to be processed to get to what actually had occurred and get through Monsanto's misinformation. And Robert and his group of fellow jurors were probably one of the smartest juries we'd ever seen. I think almost everybody had everyone had a college degree, and probably 2/3 of them had graduate degrees. And we had one PhD a bench scientist that worked on microbiology. And
Hey,
so,
Michael, my advanced degree is in ceramics. Just
right.
don't forget that.
Yeah, well, you understood well what was at stake, and you wore the mantle of being a citizen juror that was not going to let themselves get bamboozled.
Kelly, I'd love to bring you into the conversation. Can you share a bit about your background and how it is you ended up spending a big part of your life focused on glyphosate?
Yeah, absolutely. And the timing of all of it is just so crazy. And before we started here, I was just reflecting on how just good it feels to be back talking about this, because I would say my interest in glyphosate was birthed out of this important court case. And just the people that were involved are just, everything from Bob and Michael and Brent and just everyone that I met has just been so outstanding. And it gives you hope, particularly with those depressing comments at the beginning about Ukraine and everything, but it makes you realize there are good people out there that are working really hard to make things right. And that's this group of people. I had just come out of probably, 4 years of chronic disease back in 2018. And it was the kind of situation that I'm seeing popping up all over the population now, with children and adults. And I really had lots of failures throughout my body, and I had neurological problems and rashes and digestive problems and lost a lot of hair and was on 4 different medications as doctors are trying to treat me, but I didn't have a diagnosis and was really incapacitated, to the point that I had to spend most of my time at my parents' house so that they could take care of the kids while my husband was off working, and really bad. And I eventually was told by the 30th doctor that I had seen, why don't you try going off of gluten? And so I said, okay, well, that's not going to do it. That's just a trend in LA where people think that that's a thing. But I was willing to try anything. And so I gave up gluten and I started getting better. And I thought, well, now this is strange. And I went to a conference on gluten sensitivity and celiac disease at Columbia University. And a scientist was talking about how this epidemic of gluten intolerance is interesting, because if you give a gluten intolerant person sterilized gluten, they don't have an inflammatory reaction like they do otherwise if it's non-sterilized. So he said, we'll have to start thinking about what else it might be that might be doing it. And I went up and I asked, did they spray Roundup on the grain? Because I didn't know, but it just seemed like something that may be. And they said, oh, we don't know. They turned around, like all the scientists, like, oh, do they spray Roundup? I don't know. And there happened to be a chief scientist from General Mills there at that conference. And he found me, took me to a corner, and he said, yeah, actually, there's a big problem because all the grains are sprayed with the non-organic grains are sprayed with Roundup, but it's going to take 2 decades to change the behavior of the farmers. And I was like, well, couldn't you just put pressure on them and they'd change it? And he said, oh, no, it's just much deeper than that. So this, my eyes were wide open. I was just Googling Roundup, and I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. And I thought, oh my gosh, there's a trial that's going on. So I'm going to go up and I am going to protest Monsanto, because I'm really pissed that I can't have gluten anymore because of this. And so I went up and I got there, and there was no fanfare at all. And this was the day that they were being assigned the judge. And I walked right in and I looked around and I was like, oh my gosh, look at these friendly people just sitting amongst, Michael and Bobby and Brent. And what alarmed me was that it was very clear that this was going to be an enormous event. And while there was media coverage, I didn't feel that there was sufficient media coverage for just how impactful this trial was going to be, because unless you're really deeply into it and realize all of the impact that this chemical has, then you might just think, oh, this is just about cancer. But it absolutely was not. This case was going to put everything on the map. And so I named myself Glyphosate Girl at the very last second and started a blog, and then just detailed the entire case, actually all 3 trials, and then happily had Bob, OJ, joining me to cover some of it too. And of course, once the Johnson trial was over, of course, there at that point was no greater master of like all the details of what was going on than someone that had been on that side. And so it's just been a great journey.
So Kelly, someone just sent a chat in asking, gluten intolerance is connected to glyphosate. I think that might be a good topic for you to talk about. And there's actually one of the things that we first talked about when I first sat down next to you. So
yes,
why don't you fire off on that?
Well, I know it's unbelievable because it's now something like, what did I read? It's like 25 to 33% of people now in the United States are concerned about gluten sensitivity or consider themselves gluten intolerant. And so what is that possibly from? So just to go back to the farm, the way oftentimes the grains are harvested is with using Roundup as a tool. So just before harvest time, the farmer will spray Roundup all over the grain, and it is called pre-harvest desiccation. That's what this is called. And they spray it so that it dries evenly, and then they can take their combine, their tractor out there, and they can just process it all really quickly, and then send this wheat to the mills, and then they process it, send it off, and then it's directly into our food, all in a very short period of time, actually. And so you definitely have on these grains a great deal of glyphosate residue. So then you look even closer, and it turns out that, for those who are familiar with leaky gut, that is what I'm talking about here. But when you have gluten and glyphosate, first of all, the gluten itself is an inflammatory protein, and so it can increase the permeability of your intestine. And so meaning that toxins that should stay inside of the intestine and inside of the gut are released into the bloodstream and can create this just a series of inflammatory reactions in the body. And then you add glyphosate to the story, and long story short, it creates even more inflammation. It makes the gut even leakier. So more of the toxins are getting out. And glyphosate is also works on the microbiome. So it selects for good gut bacteria and injures it, but actually does not injure the bad gut bacteria. And so you end up with this dysbiosis in your belly. And the combination of the gluten and the glyphosate is just a double whammy on the gut. And now we know so much. And yeah, Michael and I talked about this from the very beginning because he was the other microbiome geek. So I was so excited. I could talk to him all day long about this, but that intricate relationship between glyphosate and the microbiome and health is just so critical.
Well, I'd like to take the conversation in a number of directions, but one of the places I'd like to start is for each of you. To what extent did you lose faith in our humanity and in society? And I'd love to get your reaction to that question first before we go elsewhere.
Wow. Yeah. So I described the trial a little bit, and then afterwards, then you're allowed to read whatever you want and do all the research you want and say whatever you want. Your First Amendment rights are restored the moment that trial is over, and the judge says you're free to go or whatever. And then that's when I learned things like, immediately you start, researching. I did anyway, a lot of this stuff, and I learned, within a few days about what Kelly just talked about, the desiccation. It's like, oh, they don't just spray this and then, it rains during the growing season and it washes it all away and then they harvest. They dump it on the grains and then harvest it like the next day. Anyway, things like that. But wow. So what happened to me after the trial is like, wow, the realization that this is a lot worse than what we learned at the trial. And then you learn, there's a lot of things that, Michael could go into this, what they weren't allowed to tell us at the trial. They're not admissible for various, legal reasons. But the whole problem was much worse. And then again, it's sort of a long arc of a story, but there were 3 trials in our trial was the first trial, that Monsanto was taken to task, and then there was the second trial in federal court, and then the third trial over in Oakland in state court, which Michael and all the firms he mentioned participated in and won. The third one being the famous $2 billion verdict for the Piliads. And at that point you go, wow, there's some we're really making progress here. And then there's this period of time where this huge settlement works out, because I guess Bayer started to see the writing on the wall and say, well, we better settle with these 125,000 people who are suing us, because they all sue us. There's not enough money in the world to pay them a proper settlement, which in a way is one of the part of the problem, but that's secondary what I'm trying to say. The thing that amazed me as this went on is that Bayer is still there. Ever since the day after the trial ended, I started checking their market cap, on my news feed, and it tanked the Monday after our trial. I think I was personally responsible. It went down about $12 billion in market cap. So I had this little joke like, well, I'm responsible for $1 billion of that. It's like divided up between 12 jurors. And it's like, that's hard, that's hard to get your head around. But the thing is, Bayer is still there. They've paid out, again, to my understanding, a lot of the claimants have settled. And so I don't know how much of this $10 billion has actually been paid out, but from what I've read, it's majority, because all the settlements are confidential. Yet they're still in business, and they are still manufacturing glyphosate, and billions of pounds of it get dumped on farms, in 120 countries around the world, every day, every year.
Yeah, I think they had a banner sales year this year on glyphosate.
Oh, great. So, and this is not to say that what the Michael and lawyers, they're like the last resort. When these problems get to them, it means the government has not done its job, or governments have not done their job in regulating these companies. And of course, there's a whole nother problem. The regulatory agencies, which that's another thing I researched after this trial, is how, as they, put it, the EPA is captured, by the big ag companies. They have their people in the EPA. And then I learned that, well, the EPA was probably created with that model in mind by the people who really set that thing up. So how is this been, where's the success in this? Or one of the first things Brent Wisner said in his opening statement was like, to the jury, was like, well, you can change the world. And, I'll admit, I took that hook, line, and sinker. And I don't think it's because I'm naive. I think it's because I'm hopeful and optimistic. But my hope and optimism are sort of constantly challenged. And like we go from the adrenaline roller coaster that was the beginning of this seminar, with the take the depressing, take on Ukraine, which is it's sounds pretty accurate. To meditating on that, which I still don't think my heart rate has gone back down to where it was before Jim's Ukraine thing. It's so these things are so overwhelming. How do we deal with that? There was I remember being who's the author, Jonathan Franzen. He wrote an op-ed piece. I haven't read his novels, so I don't know what kind of author he is, but he wrote a op-ed piece a few years ago where he said we should basically just throw in the towel on climate change. He said it's over, folks. I was so angry when I read that. I was like, no, he's wrong. He's wrong. We don't give up. We don't throw in the towel. And I still don't believe that. But what his point is that in terms of sort of global change, he didn't think that's possible. But you have to take care of. We have to take care of ourselves locally. And I have come around to at least recognizing that now, that for many of us, the best we're going to do is take care of our families, our neighbors, and then our communities, our cities, counties, towns, whatever. And then if Putin wants to start a nuclear war, well, we could say we did our best for the people we love. Am I being enough of a downer here?
Well, I can give you some. I have because a day in, day out, I'm dealing glyphosate, and just how it's really wrecking everything in the earth. I mean, it just really is. And I'm sure the previous panels, they've gone through all the ways in which glyphosate. If you get rid of glyphosate, we'd all be so much better off. And this is my feeling. So I have people reaching out to me every single day that are desperately panicked and ill, and it's either them or their children. And it's a really, really hopeless place to be when Western medicine fails you and you don't even know where to look, or you're dependent on, I had several antidepressants and a benzodiazepine at one point, because it must be psychological. And so many people are told this is a psychological problem. But the people that come out of that have hit rock bottom and been able to heal themselves to come out, are these forces that see not only, wow, life is so beautiful, because I never appreciated it until it was taken away from me. And now I love it so much. And they are determined to make this a less toxic community. And from the time that this was 2018, and I felt like I couldn't find much information on it at all online. Now there are just these pockets that are popping up. And I don't know if that's due to COVID, just putting greater awareness on this, or what, but it makes me happy, because I think humans, in order to change, need to personally hit rock bottom to really be able to make that change, whether it's dietary or, what your tasks are. And that's happening all over the place, like it or not. And there are benefits for coming out of it.
And how about for you, Michael? What has this done in terms of your feeling about humanity? Are you still hopeful?
I'm more in the camp of Bob, I think, than I am in the camp of Kelly, although I respect and admire Kelly and her enthusiasm. But I keep on plugging away at it. And I think that it is really discouraging that Monsanto has not changed their label. That was supposed to be part of our deal with them, and they haven't. And I think that there's a Ninth Circuit opinion that basically said that the EPA recently, that said the EPA failed in their obligation to look into the studies that Monsanto used to support its safety and lack of carcinogenicity. And they used a lot of the data that we had exposed in the trials. And the Ninth Circuit basically said, EPA, you screwed up. You did a bad job. You need to go back and reevaluate using the right metrics to determine whether or not this is a carcinogen that needs to be restricted. That the fact that our documents, like the Monsanto papers, are online now. Anybody, we put them all there on our website. They're at DIDA, the Drug Information Document Archive at University of California, San Francisco. Great place where documents get placed that get declassified. The lingering effect of the Monsanto papers and the expert reports that are all online now that influence the way pesticides get evaluated. One of the big things that came out from the trial was that is that pesticide companies around the world evaluate pesticides not based on the formulation that combines all the elements. They test each of them separately. And the toxicity of them separately is much lower than the toxicity of them together. And so getting that out by itself has been important, but it has not made the big change in the EPA yet. Europe got very close to banning Roundup as a whole, then gave them a short runway to rehabilitate themselves. But they had a pesticide group of parliamentarians there that it said, we need to rethink the way we evaluate pesticides. We need to evaluate the formulations, because the chemicals together, like, you know, from your basic student experiments in grade school, where you can take baking soda and vinegar and some food coloring, and you can make things blow up. And but baking soda and vinegar by themselves don't do anything. Well, it's the formulation that is the problem, and the formulation is what gets sprayed on wheat just before it gets harvested, so that when you're eating your Cheerios, and oats too, so you're eating your Cheerios or your Wheaties or your Quaker Oats, you're basically eating something that just got sprayed with Roundup. And that the mechanism for how Roundup kills plants also kills some of the good microbiota in your gut, which leads to wheat sensitivities and, you know, gut diseases, gut problems. So that we've been able to get that stuff out, that the Ninth Circuit gets to use our stuff, that the European Parliament actually created a whole committee just to investigate and change the way pesticides get evaluated. That was progress. But these companies, unlike us, can breathe underwater indefinitely. They have licenses to print money. They keep coming back saying the same lies over and over and over. The trials did not stop them from lying. Scott Partridge, you know, walks right out of the courtroom and spewed a bunch of misstatements that had been proven to be untrue, and continued to say them throughout the post-verdict time period. And it's like they have no shame, and that's hard to swallow. And that notwithstanding, I pick up and continue to keep our documents out there, continue to speak out about it, and move on to the next corrupt thing that I work on. Right now, I'm working on the Gardasil, a vaccine given to girls to stop, supposedly stop them getting cervical cancer, and it doesn't. It stops. It's a long story, but it's another one of these corrupt activities, and leads to a lot of autoimmune diseases. A lot of similarity between the problems with Merck and Monsanto with their products, covering things up, manipulating the science, validating, attacking scientists who speak out. But there are people out there like us, like Bob, like Kelly, like other law firms like you that keep publishing and despite censorship, despite attacks, despite suppression, continue to get the word out. So there's, you just keep fighting, and I'm not ready to give up yet.
Yeah, to that point, I mean, $10.9 billion settlement sounds like an extraordinary amount of money. And yet my assumption is that from Monsanto and now Bayer, that's just the cost of doing business.
It put them right at the edge. It was the very thin line between paying that money out and going into bankruptcy. And that we took them right up to the edge. And they were, I mean, as Bob noted, their market capital dove tremendously. And so that was that we decided was the right point to get money to people who were dying, or people who were injured, people who had rough lives that could use the money. And rather than, put Bayer into bankruptcy and spend the next 10 years trying to extract the money out of them, and which point it wouldn't be any good to any of these people, we decided to go ahead and settle the case.
Do you have a sense from a legal strategy? Is there a price point that would actually affect and change corporate culture, corporate policy, way of operating?
Again, go back to Bob's perspective. I was very hopeful at the end of the trials, and very hopeful during the negotiations, and it hasn't exactly played out.
Meanwhile, be aware too, like Michael's not going to say this, but that original team just were superstar attorneys. And so what happened then is there were so many tag along attorneys that saw this as the work had already been done. Like, they had done all this preliminary research. They had the Monsanto papers, the cases were well documented. You could really emulate what the arguments are and bring them to any trial. I mean, I practically could at that point. And but these original law firms were very particular about what cases they were going to take on, because obviously not every case of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is caused by Roundup. And so you have to be able to prove that. And just the massive advertising to get more and more plaintiffs led to a lot of weaker cases. And so Bayer is selectively settling the ones that they know they can't win, but then highly publicizing the ones that weren't likely ever to win. And so it's frustrating for me to see, I don't know what the score is now, but often the media will keep score. I don't know if it's five losses, and Bayer's won 5 times and the other side's only won 3. But really that gives no context to why that might possibly be. So it's frustrating. And there was a trial that was hopefully going to start in November, and it was going to be Wisner Baum back and I think Moore Group but last second they settled because they know that's going to be a big public humiliation that will set them back, because they're not going to lose. Bayer would lose in that case. So it's hard to see, because all that's ready to go. Those arguments are ready to be made again.
There's another thing with Bayer is, so they're, ever since our trial, their stock market cap's been rattling around at kind of the bottom of the market, down at least 50% or more, and it's never come back. And so they have activist investors who keep trying to oust what's his name, Werner Baumann, the CEO, or whatever you call the CEO in Germany. And they're doing it for different reasons, but they're very disappointed with his acquisition of Monsanto, and said he didn't do his due diligence, acquiring this company that had these huge liabilities. And it's not, Monsanto has all kinds of liabilities that aren't besides glyphosate, as for most of you know. Agent Orange, there's these huge dioxin settlements that keep coming down, all over the country. But anyway, yeah, bottom line is they're still in business. I'm curious, Michael, you said part of your agreement was to, and I remember they were, to change the labeling, and I just can't believe they haven't done that, even for their own protection. It's like they're willing to continue. People are going to keep, the thing I don't get is people are going to keep getting sick.
I know, it's so true.
It makes no sense business-wise because they're just creating more and more plaintiffs,
right,
that will continue to come against them. It's they're making so much money. They have a license to print money. They can continue to keep fighting, but that notwithstanding, we still have the Ninth Circuit ruling. We still have the DIDA, that Drug Information Document Archive, Drug Industry Document Archive. And they have said they're going to take Roundup off the domestic market. But that is where a lot of the cancers occurs, because you've got people walking around in their shorts spraying it and they get it on their skin and inhale it. Whereas people who are doing it industrially are in cabins and have, they're up in these really sophisticated tractors that
air
protect
conditioning
them from direct contact. But most of the spraying is being done in industrial use. And that's where the really bad stuff is. And the recognition that by the EPA and the regulators around the world that they need to actually rein this in and go organic, that going organic, I mean, one of the really bad environmental effects of Roundup, and it's sprayed all over the world, is it kills the microbiota in the soil. And the microbiota in the soil are part of the carbon sink that absorbs a lot of the carbon that's creating excess climate heat and climate change. And there's a direct connection to Roundup's use and desiccation of plant life and desiccation of the dirt that results in dead dirt that doesn't act as a carbon sink. And organic farming is better for your individual health and better for the dirt and better for our overall environmental health. Why don't we go that route? And I hope it's not too late, and we just need to keep trying, as Bob said, at least knowing that we tried. But there's so much ill thought individuals at the top of these companies who are beholden just to make profit, and they will get removed if they don't make profit. And the shortcuts of polluting the environment with things like and making cheaper food through industrial farming, those processes are damaging to the environment, but profitable. And because they're profitable, the corporations and their boards and their shareholders are all involved with maintaining the profit without regard to the harm, because they don't have to pay for the harm. The public gets to pay for the harm.
Michael, picking up on that point, we had two scientists join us yesterday, and one of them a comment he made that really stuck with me is we as a society have put more value on money than human life. And the other scientist shared that he's hopeful that at some point enough people will value the taste of food that it will shift our society, it will shift our culture. And I'd love to get your and Bob and Kelly's comments on those thoughts.
I don't know if that's enough to motivate the big changes that we do currently. Although, you know, an organic apple or organic corn does taste way better than non-organic corn, and they have better minerals in them. There's a great documentary called Kiss the Ground about the carbon sink that microbiota provide in the soil, but they also provide the converting a lot of like inorganic molecules into organic molecules, and you end up with better mineralization of food, and that better mineralized food is healthier for you. So there's so many great reasons for going organic, and you would hope that that would change by just the food and health issues. But I think that the way profit is calculated impairs that, and that needs to be changed. If the companies, like we get to come in at the end and say, well, you need to pay for this harm. So they're paying for this little bitty harm right here. They're not paying for the harm to the soil. They're not paying for the harm to the climate, not paying for the harm to like the fertilizers and things that are required to re-energize the dirt that they killed with the Roundup. None of that becomes part of the profit loss calculation, because those damages don't get calculated. They don't have to pay for them, and they actually benefit from not paying for them. And until that's changed, we're going to have a problem, no matter how great food tastes.
Michael, maybe you should revisit a new lawsuit on behalf of the soil.
I actually thought about in law school. There was, could we represent a tree? And you can't.
Oh, you can't?
No.
Oh, it seems like you should be able to, right? Living being.
They don't have standing.
Oh.
Right.
So I'd like to invite Jim back into the conversation as we close out the time together today. Bob, you were going to say something?
No, I was just going to say, speaking of Jim, at the beginning of the conversation of war, there's a great essay by Rebecca Solnit I read in Harper's like 10 years ago or something, where she, real eye opener for me anyway. She said basically, in a way, this kind of all started after or during World War II and the great sort of industrialization of the world for war. And then when the war was over, the industrialization didn't stop. It needed something to, make and do, so the enemy became the environment, became nature, and just taking as Michael was describing, just taking resources without. So what made me think of when Michael was talking is that the kind of idea of people making money or going about their business without regard for anything is kind of like a wartime footing, where because of the war, people aren't thinking about long-term consequences because they're for obvious reasons. They're thinking of their kind of immediate survival. And I just thought that was a kind of a tie-in between the beginning of the war thing and kind of how we ended up here.
Yeah, picking up on that comment and something you mentioned, Michael. Last year, one of the guests we had on an Endangered Week programming was Jojo Mehta from Stop Ecocide International, and she's been working with some of her colleagues to get legal standing for ecocide, where nature does have a voice and nature can be represented in our legal system. And she's been making significant progress over the last couple of years with the European Union, the European Court of Justice, and is hopeful that in the not too distant future, nature will have legal standing.
Wow.
That'd
Yeah,
be
inch
good.
by inch. Inch by inch. Thank you so much, everyone. And just to build on Tom's last point, and wanted to start with you, Michael, around the rights of nature, because there's, as you know, there's a number of countries now that have codified the rights of nature as a constitutional right. And I thought there were some cases, even in the United States, where areas of nature have been protected as a constitutional matter. So the kind of your humorous quip, or the trees don't have rights, that's being eaten away at, isn't it, from a legal point of view? Because there's a lot of litigation and there's a lot of activity on that domain, because that's where it has to end up. That we have to protect nature as much as we protect human beings.
Well, I'm basically a drug lawyer, and don't know too much about the latest moves in. And I took the drug lawyer approach to Monsanto, which I think was one of the things that they were not prepared for, which is the way we go through documents, the way we get at what they do and then publish it. So that's I pay attention to that stuff. I moved back over to litigating drug and medical chemical type stuff, and haven't been paying real close attention to that. I'm so sorry to say.
Yeah, but to your point and to your expertise, Greg Coleridge was making a point about Monsanto taking California to court, and won, so that despite the IARC's findings, a U.S. district judge temporarily suspended the labeling of food products that contain traces of the herbicide because it violated the corporation's First Amendment.
Infuriating verdicts, opinions throughout all.
Say more about that.
It was, well, what Monsanto did is they through surrogates had a case filed in the Eastern District of California where they thought they had a conservative group of judges that would support them, I guess, notwithstanding all this data. And the judge just disregarded all the evidence that we had and said that Monsanto had the right not to say something that's in controversy. And so their assertion was, it's not well settled. There are still scientists out there saying that Roundup does not cause cancer. And it turned, those are all people that, industries and people that are Monsanto supported. So the fact that you have someone disputing it means that you don't have to warn people or put it in your labels, despite what the IARC says. It made no logical sense to me that just because someone's disputing it means that you have a right not to say something that has been proven by independent scientists and lawsuits that there is a problem. That you at least need to say, let people know that when you use these non-organic foods and use these Roundup, you may be exposing yourself to a carcinogen and giving yourself unhealthy gut. that leads to immune problems, that leads to lymphomas and leaky gut syndrome and Crohn's and all sorts of crud that's not pleasant. That we still have, we armed the state of California with those documents, and the judge just ignored them. But another group of judges in the Ninth Circuit took that information and sent Monsanto, Bayer back to, and EPA back to the drawing boards, saying you don't have a license to operate in the U.S. with this this approval. It was invalidly obtained, and you need to redo the science on this properly. And so I think that that ruling has been undermined by what the Ninth Circuit ruling did, but we still don't have labels, and
Right.
it ought to be labeled.
And, you know, to the general point of the rights of nature, it's just worth observing that corporations have rights.
Yeah, corporations are people too.
Invisible abstractions have rights, but a tree does not.
Right.
And,
Interesting.
It's-
and less do
ridiculous.
people have rights, particularly against corporations. It's a crazy situation for sure.
It would have been really nice if who was it, Citizens United, if when Obama had both houses, that they did not get rid of Citizens United right then.
Yeah,
we had a chance, but there's not very much that stands between us and the United Corporations of America instead of the United States of America.
Yeah, for sure. You know, and I'd like to turn to you for a second, Kelly, because I think the point that you were making earlier about the devastating effects of all this on the human body is just worth expanding a bit, you know, because it's obviously not just glyphosate that's causing the gluten sensitivities and so forth and so on. It's a range of literally hundreds of other chemicals, because Monsanto is not the only company spewing pesticides and toxicities into the environment. And so I just another note is, as I understand it, fully 2/3 of all the children in the United States now have some kind of chronic disease, as contrasted in 1970, where less than 5% of the children had any kind of chronic disease. So we're seeing diseases that are not only becoming chronic, but we're also seeing diseases that have never been experienced by human beings before. So just would welcome you to expand your remarks to say more about the assault on the human body.
Yeah.
Say nothing about nature that each one of us is having to deal with, because as I also understand it, each human body now has around 100 plus or minus chemicals that were not in human bodies 75 years ago.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I know when you start reading studies on what we're exposed to on a daily basis, it's so appalling. And I think I focus on glyphosate simply because it is the most used herbicide that we have. So we know that it's in our urine. We know we're exposed to it all the time, even if we try not to. I eat organically, it's still in my urine. You know, it's just ubiquitous. But certainly there are other insults. Atrazine comes to mind, the second most.
Just to stop you for a moment here. So what you're saying, even of those of us who are eating organic as carefully as we can, are not protected from these toxicities.
Well, I was so appalled because I was just totally, you know, as I say, I was getting things as farmers market, but it turns out even organic things to a certain extent can have glyphosate in them because of drift. So, and sometimes it also is in the water from runoff from farms that are using glyphosate. And so not only that, but it's in the rain. Sometimes it's found in drinking water. It's in the air. And I'm not sure to the extent to which I haven't seen any studies, but we are burning, you know, a lot of times when you're at the gas pump and you see 10% ethanol, that's GMO corn that is Roundup ready corn that then is put into a form that we can use for gasoline, and then it's vaporized when it's burned. So where are those contents going? Well, into the air. So we're breathing that too. I saw a study too with the wildfires in California that a lot of the chemicals that are being sprayed in Napa Valley, then also, it disrupted the entire system. Then those are all circulating in the air again. And so, yeah, you're right. We have just so many different things that we're exposed to. And I recently put in a whole house water filtration system. And I would say that is cost prohibitive. That was extremely expensive. How many people are really able to go out and buy a whole house water filtration system? And on the children front, so my two kids have both had struggles that if they didn't have someone who had been through our own experiences, they'd probably still be struggling with, but through dietary changes and supplementation and gut healing, we've gotten them under control. But I took my son to the pediatrician in August, and the pediatrician said, we're thrilled because just today we got the approval that we can start giving kids under 10 colonoscopies. And I said, well, that's
You're kidding.
horrible news that's a thing. I was like, there's enough demand for that? He said, well, yeah. And this guy is not calculating how absurd that is, that people under 10 would need a colonoscopy. But one of my friends has a 2-year-old who now has Crohn's disease. And, and what concerns me is I personally try and take those opportunities to not annoy them with like too much information, because then they don't like me for it. I've learned, but the thought then to several of these parents that now they're going to have to do this extra work that maybe isn't just a pill for Crohn's disease starting on their 2-year-old, and instead they're going to have to clean up their diet, maybe do some dietary limitations. That is something that a lot of people aren't willing to do. And that's the area more than actually the corporations being greedy and polluting and never paying. It's when human behavior, even on behalf of their children, isn't changed, that worries me. And so, I think the more that we can just do almost, and I've often thought we need a big PR push that matches what the other side is doing. And I think that there are certainly Kiss the Ground and a few others are definitely focusing in on that PR element, but to normalize that there are other approaches to healing our children besides a colonoscopy and Crohn's medication for the rest of their life. So yeah, the impacts on our children, and not only that, but now it's been shown that glyphosate crosses the blood testes barrier. So now you have glyphosate in semen. We know it impacts women's fertility and can impact the integrity of the eggs. And we see crashing fertility. And you'll read about it in, I saw an article, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and people aren't saying that this is why. You can hear a lot of different reasons, and certainly EMFs, also in like holding a laptop, and there are other, in plastics, there are different contributors to fertility, but we know that glyphosate is having an impact on reproduction. And a really upsetting study came out where scientists were studying, they tracked the glyphosate content in second trimester women in their urine. And then they saw what the results were in their babies. And they found that the women with the higher levels of glyphosate content in their urine also had baby girls that had a lengthening of the distance between the vagina and the anus, which is androgenization. And that's horrific, particularly as a society, as we see more of this androgenization between like glyphosate and atrazine as well. What does this mean for the future of our race? We're literally talking right now about extinction of our species. And it's not just people, it's also the animals that are impacted by it. The EPA has even said that these endangered species, it's like 93% are impacted by glyphosate, and their lives are threatened. But this dwindling fertility is something that should keep people very alert. But I just don't think they know because it's not being reported.
Yeah, well, I've read
There's a lot of toxins
sperm.
in the environment in
ahead,
addition to Roundup.
Yeah.
And some of them are injected. A lot of kids are being injected with more vaccines than, our generation did not have that level of vaccines. And there's metals and adjuvants in there, just like in Roundup, that the formulation is designed to be
Exactly.
harmful to living things. And that's why they put them in vaccines, is that they want to have an immune reaction to the toxins that are the adjuvants. We're not looking at the downstream effects very well of being, awash in a sea of toxins. And it's the chemical industry, it's the food industry, it's medical industry, big pharma. They are all polluting our environment, and it's tough to be healthy and safe from all that. But people like you, people like Kelly, people like Bob, there's a lot of people out there still trying, and there are things that can be done. Eating organic, even though you still have a little bit of glyphosate, a little bit of Roundup there, it's not nearly as bad as the 20 or 30 times more level that you get by eating non-organic food. You're still doing something good by doing that, and continue to do that.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Michael. Because it's easy, when you take all this in, to despair.
Yeah.
And to really realize that we're up against horrendous forces who know what the truth is and simply don't care.
Yeah.
I think that's what's debilitating on the psyche, is if it was a matter of ignorance and once it was pointed out, they would change their way. That would be one thing. But it's not a matter of ignorance. It's a matter of volitional, intentional, and persistent suppression of the truth in order to maximize corporate profits, while the very ecosystem and human race are being polluted in ways that probably we still don't fully understand.
Well,
And,
I try to start my day off the way you started this webinar off, with getting centered, using mandalas similar to what you have, and starting from there and having that clear, clean, mindful space to start from, because I can in particular, I'm sure a lot of people, when they're aware of this stuff, can despair over how monumental the opposition to doing the right thing is. And if you start from that center, you at least have a chance to operate in a mindful way. So thank you for that.
Michael's telling the truth. Look at what I have it here. This is what he sent me. We might recognize. And you know what?
Here now.
It's good when you're taking on these really, really distressing things. I mean, you need to be able to go into that space, right? Or else you can't get up the next day.
Start from that center and then proceed from there.
And that's why we do 10 breaths every session of Humanity Rising. And I would make a more fundamental point. I believe that what we're experiencing at all levels is an increase in stress and pollution and tension in our external environment. I mean, Ukraine, climate change, glyphosate, mass shootings in the United States, all kinds of turbulence. And as we now are seeing the data that everywhere in the world, without exception, people are feeling significantly more stressed, and there's more crime, there's more alcoholism, there's more drug abuse, there's more suicides, there's more depression, there's more anxiety. So one of the things we're doing, and I wanted to underscore what you both just said, is we're encouraging people to up their stress management proportional to the increase in the external stress.
Great point.
And turbulence. And unless we do that, we're not going to be able to keep up. I mean, just think of the road rage, the epidemic of road rage, because people are more and more feeling out of control. So for us, the point that you're making, Michael and Kelly, about the need for centering each and every day is a matter now. It's like a national security issue.
Yeah.
30 years ago, mindfulness was a nice idea.
Yeah.
You had time and you were from California, but that's no longer the case. We've all got to do it as a matter of personal hygiene And that 5.5 breathing, I would recommend everybody look at James Nestor's book, Breath. He points out that the most effective way in the shortest period of time to optimize all your body processes, balance your sympathetic and parasympathetic systems, which are your foundational systems, and bring coherence to all of your systems, is through this extraordinary 5.5 seconds in and 5.5 seconds out. And as it turns out, the number 5 is the number in sacred geometry of the feminine, of the mother. It's the number of the planet Venus. It's the number of the goddess Aphrodite. So it's very comforting to breathe in the mother and to breathe out the mother every day. So thank you for that.
Excellent advice.
Yeah.
One last parting thing I want to say is that in all the
and then Kelly, you say something, and then Bob, and then Tom. Let's have a final comment from everyone. How would you inspire us at the end of this discussion?
I would do the best I could to decrease the toxins that you're exposed to. So eat organic. Do not take pharmaceutical drugs if you can. Try to get off of them. Antidepressants, statins. There are organic, healthy ways to live, and you should do that. Do not self-medicate with too much alcohol. Do not overtake toxins in your environment. You're already awash in them. Give your body a chance. And so I decrease all those things. Eat as much organic. Avoid as much pharma injections and pills as possible, and do the 5.5 breaths and center yourself each day.
Thank you, Michael. Kelly.
So, I mean, I see just eye to eye. I second everything that Michael said. In fact, today I'm going for like a lymphatic drainage treatment because the toxicity that is in our body that we just can't avoid it's really appalling. So similarly, try and live cleanly. And I also, for anyone who is coping with illness themselves right now, or chronic disease or mysterious illness, or their kids, have one of the many diseases and now they have, don't shut down the potential for healing, because I think it gets very, very frustrating, and it can be years of illness, but the body does know how to heal itself if it's given the right tools. And a lot of that comes in the form of limiting exposure to toxins and just letting the body do what it's supposed to do without all these other interferences. But keeping your spirit high, which is so hard when you're feeling so low, but definitely this breathing and getting into the meditation, but then also supporting yourself with, I think when we're talking about road rage, and I have a lot of people that flip me off, so I don't know whether I'm a bad driver, if they're in a bad mood. but
how could someone flip you off?
I mean, that's what I said. Look at them. So that I always think if you could just give everyone a magnesium bath and have them take zinc, because it's not in our food anymore. It's not in the soil because of this freaking glyphosate that like chelates all these minerals. So it's not in our crops. They're deficient in the minerals that should be making everyone calm. So I think the first stop, that magnesium bath, is a great one.
Thank you, Kelly. You look radiant for whatever you're doing.
You
good.
do.
For you.
Really? I'm so happy.
You could be our poster child.
Oh, good. Detox.
Robert, just quick comment, and then Tom. You can wrap us up.
Thank you for this. I think awareness is, nothing happens without that, and you guys are, helping people be aware of all sorts of things. I do the 10. I totally agree with the meditation. But I do 10 seconds in 10 seconds. I do 3 breaths a minute, and the idea is I go really down deep where there's like nothing for about 20 minutes every day, hopefully. I push back a little bit on the stress, though. I think stress is nature's way of telling us something. And the problem with stress, it's a fight or flight response. right? And if you don't do one of those two things, that's when it's bad for you. And so don't don't flee. I say fight. And it can be the smallest thing, but in response to stress, if you just do something, and it may not be the world's greatest activist, but it could be something as small as changing your diet, getting involved in a community garden, helping a neighbor, any little thing. It's helps tremendously, because it's the action that counteracts the stress. So I'll leave you with that on my behalf.
As we say on Humanity Rising, don't just watch. Do something.
Right. Here.
Thank you all. This has been just a marvelous, marvelous session, both sobering and inspiring. So I just want to acknowledge your courage and acknowledge your fortitude and acknowledge how inspiring you've been to all of us on Humanity Rising today. So I salute you.
Same right back at you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tom?
Yeah, Michael, Kelly, Bob, thank you for the work you've been doing, the work you're continuing to do, and just so grateful for you to be on the show today and share a bit about your journey. Tomorrow, we're going to be building off of part of the conversation I didn't expect us to drift into, where we'll be talking about the microbiome in the soil and the microbiome in the bodies with Dr. Zach Bush tomorrow. So
Nice.
Delighted to have him with us, and just building off the conversation we've had this week about really trying to understand this question of dealing with the code red issue we have with our health system, our food system, our soil, of how did we get here? And so delighted to have Dr. Bush with us tomorrow. And as always, thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you all. That brings our session to a close,
Thanks,
everyone. Jim. You can join the after session chat group. You'll see the link in the chat box. We'll see you tomorrow for Zach Bush and the microbiome. Bye for now. Thanks so much.
Bye.